All right, our next assignment for photography is to focus on texture. And you can see that assignment sheet and get a verbal rundown of what I'm looking for. But the main difference between this and the contrast studies project is that your 3 images should show diverse examples of visual texture. And those will be shown by having strong contrast, by having distinctly contrasted blacks and whites, but also clear gray values in between those blacks and whites. A photographer I enjoy is Karl Blossfeldt, who was a naturalist photographer in Germany in the first half of the 20th century. And he initially didn't set out to make aestheticized photographic prints. He was just documenting different species for his studies. But in some of his shots, he just really perfects, because he was interested in minute details, this diffused raking light that really showcases every little bump, every distinct texture. Whether the subject was transparent or on macro scale, whether it was a really dark plant here or a very light plant, he was able to bring those textures out with the way he lit them. And then when he got kind of known for this and collected for this, he started to play then with not such unusual flowers and naturalist forms, but say like this simple tulip. He would play with his aperture settings and kind of artfully blend hard edges with soft edges. And that made them even kind of a bigger world of texture. So just some beautiful examples of texture photography. And when you shoot texture well, and you're really paying attention to those little details, you know, things as small, this is just a blade of grass. And this is how grass grows when it's cut. It can look like a skyscraper, you know, when shot well. Cool stuff. All right, so it's similar to the way Edward Weston shot like his cabbage leaves and things, and he was definitely interested in texture there. But this is just such a systematic way of using diffused lighting from the side. And he actually wouldn't use a whole lot of reflected light, but that would make it even rounder looking. You can see the reflected light in this on the edges. So you have the highlight, you have the core shadow, and then you have the reflected light. But you'll notice that the highlight is so minimal, the core shadow is so minimal, but that mid-range, all that fuzz is easily distinguishable. And that's how you really can capture and make the most of textures, no matter what you're shooting. Most of the time we don't want to shoot texture very well because it shows imperfections. So when we're doing portraits and things, we do a lot to minimize the texture. But here I want you to really celebrate it. You can look at some past student examples. Like an avocado skin here. And the goal is to really shoot them and minimize the highlight and the shadow and just really maximize those midtones. All right, so how do we go about it? It all starts with exposures, of course. So while I was at the Student Rush, I tried to get a few different exposures of textures using the available light. And I wanted to kind of put together somewhat of a theme of diversity of texture, if nothing else. But I started by shooting some of the food that was at Rush. So I liked the nachos, I liked the popcorn, the Frito pie. There was a fur coat on display. There was this hat costume. And then there were potted plants with their kind of grassy insides, and I brought a moss ball in from inside. There was trash. There was this piñata. There was stuff in the cafeteria. You know, lots and lots of different examples. Outside there were trees, there was bark. So textures are different than pattern because textures use the reflection of the light as one of their properties. So bark looks scaly, but it also absorbs the light. So it looks very different than if it was scaly and wet. Or this moss ball, like the Blossfeld exposures, when shot up close and with proper side lighting, you can see that it's not really, it looks furry. It looks almost like it's made of velvet. It's all these little bumps everywhere. Or this piñata, you see actually the paper texture, not just the overall shapes and shadows. Or the fur of this moss ball with the imitation filler at the base of this potted plant. Or with the hair, even though it's black hair, when lit the right way, without blasting anything out, you can see all of those individual pieces and how they come together to make a texture. And then there's just other types. So wood is very linear, and so you have the repetition and the texture of these pieces of wood together, but then you also just have that linear texture of the wood grain. The products here are all shiny and reflective, so you get very strong highlights. You just don't want them to be very big, but that strong highlight with strong core shadows makes it feel really like fully shiny. Similar for the sequins in this hat, how they'll have bright highlights on them at the same time as having dark shadows. That just is more about their reflective properties than about their individual shape. Or the nacho cheese, you know, and how smooth it is. So I like the popcorn a lot too. I'm getting hungry now. So how do I narrow this down? I've got lots of nice textures that have some good potential. How do I narrow it down? Any ideas? Well, I might start with favorites, right? And while I'm looking in preview, this is still just all off my memory card. I could just do a really quick adjust color in preview just to see what they look like without any color. And looking at their histogram, and I can even hit auto levels, which the auto levels doesn't do much for this because it's already pretty balanced. But that really shows off that texture well. It's not reliant on color. So I think that's one I need to use. So I'm going to drag that to the desktop. And then I really like this shot, but I wonder if when I take color out of it, it just won't be as interesting. And it's pretty nice. And is it distinct from the fur? Yes, absolutely it's distinct from the fur, right? So yeah, why don't I use that one as well? Drag it to the desktop. Now I've got fur, I've got kind of these natural tangled vines. I could do the wood, but that looks kind of dead without the color. It doesn't have quite as much variation. So I already have something very natural. So what about this piñata? What if I take its saturation all the way down? Yeah, that's pretty compelling in there. That feels distinct again. So I would like you to choose 5. I've chosen 3. And I'll go ahead and choose 2 more. Come on, close for me. I'm curious to see what I can do with this nacho cheese. And if it will lose all of its appetize. Yeah, so in black and white, it just doesn't have quite that range, right? In fact, the chips would probably be more interesting to focus on than the cheese itself, because the chips have so much more textural variation. Though it is definitely a different kind of texture. So maybe not that one. So you can use preview as kind of a program that helps you see the potential of it. And that's nice, There's a lot of nice gray values, but the texture doesn't overwhelm me. Yeah, and similar to the nachos, it's like, yeah, it's okay. But it's really the color that's adding the most contrast. This has a nice range of value ranges. You know, very full range. But being on that white styrofoam mannequin, it kind of flattens it out. And then I already have textures similar to this. So this is the only other one I'm tempted by. So at least have 5 different exposures you're considering. But only pull up your strongest few. Okay. It's a little annoying in this new version of Preview. I'm sure I can fix this in preferences, but it will save automatically. So I just want to undo any of the previews I've done before I close it onto my memory card. Because even if I don't use them for this project, they might have a use later. Who knows? Memory is cheap. All right, so I've got the 3 I want to use. 1, 2, what's the third one? Ah, here it is. Okay. So now, and this is all a little disorganized, right? Because I need to put everything into my folder. So let me move all my contrast study stuff. Clean up my desktop for the next project. And now I'm going to create a new folder. It's going to be for my texture studies, assignment 2. And we're going to learn a new way to process these, to have some fun with these, now that we've done the basics. So let me take this one. I'm going to open it up in Photoshop. And just to compare it to the old way, let's review what we did. Make a duplicate of it. Very important to make a duplicate so you can always go back to the raw exposure. Go to Adjustment, Levels, look at the histogram, balance it. So since I have such heavy darks here, I'm going to brighten up the midtones a little bit, but leave the edges alone. Duplicate it again, go to Hue Saturation, take out all the saturation, duplicate it again, go into Hue Saturation, colorize, pick my formulation. I'm going to go a little warmer this time, so maybe 67. Seems like a good age. Right. Now what do? I save this as my texture exposure. This is just a contrast with the new techniques I'm going to show you. Save it as a Photoshop file onto the desktop. Then I would crop it down to a square, make sure this is empty, hold down Shift, something like that. Then I would balance out the levels within the crop. You see now I can really, like the Blossfeld exposures, I can really push this now and showcase all that mid-range. See, it's all in there. Lovely. If I need to, I can even limit some of the mid-range if I think it's getting too strong. I can limit the highlights, limit the shadows, so I can keep pushing it out at each edge. So we can get quite sophisticated with that. All right, and then I would shake that image size. Well, actually I won't do that yet. But let me just save this. Texture exposure cropped. Save that as a PSD, just to compare it. All right, and now I'll pick up with doing that a different way with the next demo.